Hey, my name's Lane Rickabaugh, as you would know, Dr. Sawyer. And today I'm going to be talking about the number talks that I did throughout the week. So, without further ado, let's just jump right into it. So, you might have remembered that I showed you my number talks at the very beginning of the class, the Thursday before we actually went into immersion week. And I made sure that they were all okay. And you gave me the double thumbs up, which is a good reason to be able to go forward. So, and that is exactly what I did. So, on Monday, I did a number talk where I had five numbers. Four of the numbers were relatively close together on the slide, and one of the numbers was a little bit farther away. And the numbers that I put down there were 6, 9, 15, 16, and all the way over there was the number 12. So that was 6, 9, 15, 16, and 12. And the idea was for the students to be able to tell me which number did not belong in this group of numbers and why. Now, obviously, I work with a third grade class. I should have clarified that. Obviously, from an adult's perspective, the first thing that you might notice is that 6, 9, 15, and 12 are all divisible by 3. But surprisingly, not really surprisingly, because we're not really into division or multiplication in my third grade classroom, but I did not have any responses that talked about numbers, any of the numbers being divisible by 3. In fact, if anything, the only time that I can remember 16 being singled out, it was just singled out because it was the largest number, and all the other numbers were a little bit smaller. Oh, well, that's actually not completely true. Another student did very well point out that 16 and 6 both used 6 in the ones place, which I, of course, had not thought about. But they said that 16 doesn't belong because when you go in the order 6, 9, 12, and 15, 16 is reusing a number that's already been used in the ones place, and so that one does not belong. But another student did say that it was not supposed to be in the group because it was the largest, which is perfectly fine. The main thing here is for them to be able to use what they know about math, especially place value, which is something that's been to hit over their heads pretty much the entire time that I've been in this practicum with them, and be able to use what they already know to back up their answer and their reasoning and their thinking. And it's something I've seen my cooperating teacher use a lot. So they had these five numbers. And like I said, 4 of them were close together, and 12 was all the way up there. And I'm just trying to think. Yeah, so one of the numbers was actually colored in blue, and I did that on purpose. That's something I'd seen my cooperating teacher do before. And just by having the number colored in blue, of course, that was kind of bait for a student to say, oh, well, this number is colored in as blue. So obviously the number 15 does not belong. Of course, the number 12 being all the way over there, did have students say, well, 12 doesn't belong because it's all the way off to the side and nobody wants to play with it. I do remember a student very astutely saying that because it was being pushed out, so obviously it didn't belong in the group where everybody else was in. Another group of kids, actually, not a group of kids, sorry, another student actually said that 9 and 6 added up to be 15, and that none of the other numbers added up to be anything else. And so 15 doesn't belong, not because that it was shaded in blue, but because 2 of the numbers actually added up to that number, which I thought was really interesting. And I liked how they were able to look at the group of numbers and tell that 2 of the numbers added up to that. In fact, I didn't even realize that the 2 numbers would add up to 15, although I probably should have since they're all divisible by 3. I was taken aback, though, on the first day by the immense amount of volunteering that students did, especially their enthusiasm to get their answer out. As soon as I said, okay, I want you to take a minute or two to think about which number doesn't belong, immediately after I said that, I had kids go, their hands shot up in the air, and I said, okay, well, just think for a minute or two. I want you to come up with the best possible answer and come up with solid reasoning, because I want you to use what you know about math to make a good decision. Um, Honestly, I think it was good for that day. They were going to start talking about money, and doing a bit of review before talking about money. And two of my number talks were actually on money, but doing a little review on place value before they actually work with place value, in the sense of the hundredths and the tenths. Working with cents, I think might have been good, especially since we had quite a few people mention the ones place. Um, so yeah. And I thought the first day went well. So moving on to the second day. The second day was a little bit different. So this time, I used dots, and the idea was how many different ways can they figure out the number of dots. There are a lot of strategies that could be used here. For example, doubles or near doubles, or friendly numbers, making tens and whatnot. I purposefully put some of the dots to look kind of like a 5 does on a die, and I had two students bring that up to me when I called on them, that it was really easy to count that 5 that was right there, because all they had to do was like, oh, it's like on a dice. And so they could immediately count that 5, and then they could just move on and count the rest of the 3. So they didn't even really have to go through and count that first 5. They could just count on from that. So I thought that was really neat, that they could do that. On top of that, I had off to the side a couple that were kind of in doubles. In fact, the ones that were 5s, that kind of looked like 5s, I had students point out could be sorted into doubles, and so that was the quick way that they were able to do that. I'll send you the number talk sheet if you're interested in seeing it. I think it could help with the visualization of what's going on here. But moving on, some of the students were able to look across the row. So I had some numbers right here, and I would have some numbers right here. And some of the students were actually able to look across and go count by 3. So they did 3, 6, 9, and then they had 3 left, which were not all lined up, and they just added those last 3 and got 12. And they said that was their strategy. 3 of them were actually colored a different color. I had purple and gold for JMU, and some of the students did say that they thought color would be a good way to count the number of dots that I had. So yeah, I did invite some of the students to come up onto the smartboard and circle the number sets that they were counting with, and I think that really helped the other students with their visualization of what the other students were thinking. And yeah, I think it went really. I thought this one went really well. I communicated back with the student, and I asked, if they were trying to reason something. I said, well, can you come up and show me what you're thinking? Especially if a student would start to fumble along with their words and start getting a little nervous. I'm like, hey, just take your time. It's okay. I really want to understand what you're thinking, what's going on through your head, and where you're coming from. And sometimes the students might take about 10 or 15 seconds to regroup their thoughts, but they'd come out with some really interesting ideas, especially with the addition and the grouping of numbers that they can immediately do from personal experience and through repeated practice. Once again, it was a very enthusiastic day. The next day, so we're moving on to day 3, talked about money, and it wasn't as difficult, or really, I don't want to say it wasn't as difficult. It wasn't as like there are multiple answers as there was. It starts to get a little bit less like that. In fact, in this number talk, it was more, I put a bunch of coins out on the slide, and I asked how much money is here and how'd you figure it out. And the students had to explain to me how they got the amount of money that they got. And most students, I think all students counted the quarters first, but it was a matter of did they count the dimes and the nickels together? Did they count the dimes first? Did they count the nickels first? Really, did they try to make a dollar? Because there were students that tried to make a dollar before they moved on to the extra money. And so it was really how it was spread out like you would have coins in your hand if you just kind of reached into your pocket and you pulled out a bunch of coins. And so how would you sort the money? Like I said, I had students that came up and said, well, I made $1, and they circled the coins that could make $1, and then they said, then I just added the rest of the coins up to get the rest of it, and that's how I got this. And luckily they had a good bit of knowledge on money through this week because that's what they were learning, and I think that kind of helped reinforce that. And other students just went ahead and added all of the silver coins and then said, now I'm going to add all the pennies, and that helped them too. But in terms of really creative strategies, not to say that those strategies weren't creative, it wasn't as, I guess, deep thinking, I guess. Yeah. I mean, students were still making tens. Students were still trying, to make, I don't want to say making landmarks, but when you get rid of these giant quarters, the 2 giant quarters that I have here, it definitely can make it seem a lot more doable. So, just moving on to the last day. The last day, I actually did have a making landmark problem where I asked them to subtract $2.49 from $5. Most of the students just did it the traditional mathematical way. In fact, this was the most disappointing math talk day in terms of how I guess handled it. Most students just said, well, I subtracted it. They didn't really think outside the box, but I did have one student say that they added a cent to the $2.49 so that they could subtract $5 minus $2.50. And most students in there knew that $2.50 was half of $5, not all of them, but only one student was able to connect that, and that was kind of the point of it, and I made sure to kind of make a big deal about his answer. Not to say that anybody else was wrong, but almost everybody else did it just in a math way. But add the cent and then you take out the cent. Or, sorry, you... Man. Yeah, adding the cent and then adding the cent to the total as well. So, yeah. But that went well-ish. It seemed like it didn't go as well as the brainstorming days just because it was more of a certain number. But the students all did the problem. Well, most all students still did the problem. I can't vouch for all students because there were some students that got frustrated, one of which gets frustrated quite a lot. But I did make sure to go over and reinforce them and say, hey, if you get it wrong the first time, you've got to go after it the second time, and the third time, you can't just sit there and be upset at yourself when you make mistakes. Otherwise, you're not going to make it past you're not going to make it very far. And that's something that we've been working on with this kid. So, just an impact I think I saw in the students. The students seemed to be more respondent to me as a teaching presence in the classroom throughout the week, which I really appreciated. I was more of a guest, it seems, before then, but once I started coming every day and leading something every day, they definitely seemed to have a different level of respect towards me and my presence in the classroom. Their attitudes towards math, I've worked with them in math groups before. Some of them can get really frustrated, like that kid on the 4th day. But for the most part, they were trying, and they really wanted, especially with the ones where they know there isn't like a right answer, but that they can explain their answer. They were really excited to share why their answer was the right answer. So, in the future, I think number talks are a really great way to explain to kids. It's a great way to get kids out of their bubble with mathematics, because I think one of the most daunting things about mathematics is that it's the thought that there's only one right answer. And with problems, yes, that might be true, but there are many different ways to think about math, and there are many different ways that students come to conclusions when they look at numbers or number sets, when you give them the opportunity. And it's a good way for them to use math that has already been taught to them and applying it to kind of a real world situation. Um, so it's definitely something that I would implement in the future. I am going to implement it in the future. Um, I is it realistic? Yeah. I mean, all the kids were enthusiastic. I mean, I know it's not they're not all going to be enthusiastic in all classrooms, but I mean, if it's something that you introduce at the beginning of the year and it's something that kind of guides them into math, it can be something that's fun because it's kind of like a warm up before a hard workout, you know? A warm up is nice. You know that the workout's going to be tough, but you're going to enjoy that warm up as much as you can and, you know, yeah. Um, the only cons I can think of in number talks is it can take up some time. You could have some students that get a little frustrated, but I don't see how they could get even more frustrated than they could get with anything else. Number talks, a great pro is that it can just ease students into a new mathematical concept, you know, and it can be a good reviewer, and it can be really telling as to what students actually need to review and what you need to plan more lessons on. So yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I don't really have any questions going forward, but if you would like my link on my number talks, I'd be happy to give it to you, Professor. Other than that, have a nice day or have a nice night, and I'll see you later. Bye.